Hello, everyone. Welcome to Marsh Stream. I'm Stephanie Wiseman, founder of The Marsh and Marsh Stream, and I'm so happy to be here tonight for our Solo Arts Heal program with Blake Sugarman. Thrilled to hand it over to our host, as I said, with the most. Let's welcome Gail Schickele.
Good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to have you with us, as always, on this diverse platform, Solo Arts Heal. It's a vision born from artists' inspiring true stories about overcoming adversity, surviving mental and physical challenges, and becoming their own health advocates. And tonight, another milestone as we visit our Solo Arts Heal Climate Edition, where now once a month we're presenting both performance and informants on climate change, to which our health and all environmental issues are connected. We're all grateful to be a part of the Marsh Stream at the forefront of live streaming these shows among your so many new and seasoned performers. As we have for you tonight, our guest is Blake Sugarman, performing excerpts from his show Prelude to the Apocalypse, for what it's worth. And in our talkback with Muriel McDonald from the Sunrise Movement Bay Area. Today, we know that climate disruption is the biggest challenge humanity has ever faced. And in the last years, so much has transpired, but in the last month, I'm just going to mention a couple important events. The White House moved to gut the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, a law that has provided the foundation for environmental protection and public participation in government actions for 50 years. Gutting NEPA is particularly devastating in this time of COVID, and especially for communities of color who are often targeted by dirty projects. Some analysts call it death by zip code. And secondly, the last fully complete ice shelf in the Canadian Arctic collapsed. The Milne ice shelf in northern Canadian territory lost more than 40% of its area, shrank about 80 square kilometers. By comparison, the island of Manhattan in New York is about 60 square kilometers. The Arctic has been warming at 2 times the worldwide rate for the past 30 years. And this year, temperatures in the polar area have been especially intense. The polar sea ice hit its lowest total amount for July in 40 years, and record heat and wildfires have burned Siberian Russia. And Antarctica isn't immune. In September, the Amery ice shelf in Antarctica just produced its biggest iceberg in more than 50 years. The calved block covers an area a little smaller than Scotland's Isle of Skye. And so with glaciers melting, seas rising, and 16 of the 17 hottest years on record coming this century, we know humanity must change and act boldly to solve the climate crisis. The good news is that we know we can. Solar, wind, and other renewable solutions are becoming more affordable every year. And the good news is the Sunrise Movement, the growing and productive youth movement, along with youth leaders like Greta Thunberg, who last fall led the Montreal Climate March, 500,000 strong, a SOLFA march in which I was happy to participate, along with marches here on the West Coast, and they're happening all over, have happened, of course, all over the world and all over this country. Climate, this is the perfect time for Solo Arts Heal Climate, which, like all our shows, are gifts to the communities we share by offering information and inspiration for your empowerment and advocacy through outstanding talent and in talkbacks with guests and you, our audience, about these varied health issues, including the health emergency of climate change, all related to our own health and caregiving for our Mother Earth. Here we come together for peace and healing as we embrace the healing power of the arts, because it's through the arts we find the truth of our shared humanity, which we're happy to share tonight with Blake Sugarman. Blake is a multidisciplinary artist who is currently based in Brooklyn, but will be joining us here in the Bay Area in the fall. He's a poet, a musician, and an activist, in addition to being a solo performer. His solo shows have presented at La Mama, The Brick, the Living Gallery, Bushwick Open Studios, and NYU's Experimental Theater Wing. Tonight, he will be sharing excerpts from a piece called Prelude to the Apocalypse, for what it's worth. So, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Blake Sugarman.
Once upon a time, on a planet called Earth, there were these creatures called dinosaurs. You accept that, right? There aren't a lot of dinosaur denialists, as far as I know. Even if you go to the Creation Museum in Petersburg, Kentucky, which is a thing that actually exists. It's a sort of natural history museum meets Disney World depiction of the book of Genesis. If you go to the Creation Museum, you will find dinosaurs in the display cases, living alongside Adam and Eve. There's even one with a saddle on it, like the Flintstones or something. I must have missed that part of the Bible. So they don't believe in evolution per se, but they do believe in dinosaurs. Pretty sure everybody does, that these giant dragon creatures once roamed the earth, and now, for some reason, literally all of them are gone. Maybe they didn't make it onto the ark. But here's the thing. When people first found huge fossils, the concept of extinction didn't exist yet. They assumed, and I understand why they would, that whatever creature had these enormous bones was still out there lurking somewhere in the woods. When Thomas Jefferson sent out Lewis and Clark to explore the American West, one of the things he was really hoping they would find was a mastodon, one of the big mammoth-looking things whose giant tusks they kept finding. The American elephant! Gotta be out there somewhere, right? Species don't just disappear. Seemed to make sense at the time. But things change. Both our understanding of what's going on and what's actually going on. Things can change a lot. I made a wish just now. I can't tell you what it was or else it won't come true. I think that's how this works, right? I guess it's also supposed to be my birthday, which it is not, but this is the theater, so we can pretend. On my 4th birthday, I wished that I would become Batman, like the next one or something, that I would take his place. I blew out 4 candles and I wished this sincerely. Where would you be tonight if wishes came true? If prayers came true, if our dreams were like chains we couldn't escape, we can't always escape. My name is Blake Sugarman, and I am speaking to you from August 12th, 2020. Now, it should come as no surprise that I'm not Batman. I really have not made much of an effort to become Batman. I don't even want to be Batman anymore. My wishes have changed. It turns out lots of things have changed since 1995. Back then, the Democrats still thought gay marriage was immoral. You still thought Bill Cosby was a role model, and I still thought guacamole was gross. We're in the future. Can you believe it? I drink coffee and eat kale now. 4-year-old Blake would not have believed that. My tastes matured when I wasn't looking, somehow. One might say I grew up. One might say I'm still growing. You know, sometimes I feel like humanity as a whole is still in its infancy. That eventually we will reach a kind of spiritual maturity. We'll look back on xenophobia and imperialism and environmental degradation as just these relics of a stupider time. We'll see all the lines in the dirt that just laugh way in the future. Our tastes will change way in the future. We'll finally grow up. See, that's what I used to think. But now I'm not so sure. Not so sure that will last that long. Instead, we might be the Jimi Hendrix of species, bursting onto the scene, then gone too soon. Gone before we can bring some balance to our lives. I'm talking about climate change, among other things. Now, it might be an exaggeration to say that climate change is an existential threat to our species. Only time will tell. But it is not an exaggeration to say that civilization as we know it is in peril, that it cannot be sustained, and that our collective response has been of course, a lot of people have said that the re-election of Donald Trump would basically spell game over for climate change. And if that is true, that will undoubtedly be his most lasting legacy. But even before we had a comic book villain in the White House, things were not looking that good. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, what about the Paris Climate Agreement, right? Wasn't that a big deal? And you're right, kind of. At the 21st UN Climate Summit, world leaders finally passed an historic, non-binding, voluntary agreement that says a lot of good stuff. It says we must pursue efforts to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, which scientists warn is a threshold for some pretty catastrophic shit that happened. Island nations being wiped off the face of the earth, that kind of thing. And we're at about 1 degree of warming right now. So 1.5 is a very ambitious but necessary goal. There's just one problem. The emissions reduction commitments that are part of the Paris Agreement, yet scientists say those would result in somewhere between 3 and 4 degrees of warming, more than twice the agreed upon goal. And that is if everyone follows through on their commitments. Some countries are already falling behind. It's not impossible to curb emissions in time, but for the moment, world leaders would rather preserve the status quo. They're hoping, and this is true, that someday we will develop the technology to suck the carbon dioxide back out of the air. After now 25 UN climate summits. That's the plan. So maybe one day I'll be back in too. You know, it's funny. A minute ago, I said that I hoped that we as a people would one day grow up. But according to the Bible, Jesus said we should become like little children. He said, unless you turn from your sins and become like little children, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. He said that, apparently. So I wonder what Jesus would think of Peter Pan, the boy who refused to grow up. Might he be a kind of prodigy who remained forever young, so pure he could fly, having no need for wings? I wonder. I mean, to be a little kid again, to be fascinated by your fingernails and what's under the rug, to not need an excuse to squash your face against the glass, to not have an explanation except to be limitless and shackleless and helpless and dumb, to be genuine, though, to be you, an uninhibited human being with a chance at satisfaction. Is that the kingdom of heaven? When I was in Germany, I paid a visit to Dachau, one of the big concentration camps. And I remember right as I was approaching that terrible iron gate with the Arbeit macht frei slogan on it, work will set you free, these little boys who were with some kind of scout group or something ran in front of me, playing tag or something, chasing and screaming and I guess having fun. Of course, their scout leader came over and scolded them for roughhousing in such a somber place, and they rolled their eyes. They rolled their eyes. And I wonder what Jesus would have thought about that. I guess children tend to be very present. When I go to Dachau, I think about the innocent people who suffered there during the Holocaust. But when little Boy Scouts go to Dachau, they prefer to play tag. Because presently, there are no starving people there. There is only a fence and some pebbles and some tourists. And none of that is very sad. I guess some of the tourists are sad. I was pretty sad, but keep in mind that it was adults who carried out the atrocities of the Holocaust. The world would be very different if they had played tag instead. It's important to be present. We must also be wise. And I think wisdom is about seeing this moment in context with the legacy of what's come before and where we're going. If you ask the folks at the Creation Museum, they'll tell you God made the universe especially for us, or mankind to conquer. And maybe they're right. We just showed up 13 point something billion years casually late. Because human beings have only been around for about 200,000 years. Sounds like a long time, but life on Earth began over 3 billion years ago. And it was hanging out lifeless for a while before that. So we're pretty new around these parts, but We have been here long enough to leave our mark, no doubt about that. The Earth will never, ever be the same. We changed the chemical composition of the atmosphere and oceans. We changed the landscape. We even changed the species you will find on this planet. It seems absurd, but it's true. This one weird primate species is causing a mass extinction. Now, little context might be valuable here. There have been 5 other mass extinctions in the history of life on Earth, moments when the biodiversity of our planet, the number of species, suddenly plummeted. And when I say moments, I mean periods spanning tens of thousands of years, because that is a moment in evolutionary time. It's hard to wrap your head around this timeline, but dinosaurs lived here for millions of years. We just got here. And look what we've done to the place. Now, to be clear, we're not the first species to fuck over almost every life form in our general vicinity. During the 3rd mass extinction, there's a type of bacteria that produced hydrogen sulfide gas as a waste product, which turns out is poisonous to most living things. So these bacteria contributed to the largest mass extinction in history just by being themselves. Sound familiar? Something like 90% of species went extinct, which I guess really speaks to nature's resilience, you know? New things evolve if you just give it some time. Check back in 50 million years. See? That's why it's a bit ironic when we talk about saving the planet instead of saving civilization. Because in the long run, a warmer world would likely have every bit as much life as our world today. There's some reason to believe it would have more life and in more places. I mean, what's so wrong with palm trees growing on Antarctica? Well, in the long run, that might be fine. But in the short term, a warmer climate would mean the senseless annihilation of like half the species that Noah supposedly worked so hard to save. In the short term, by which I mean any time frame that is even remotely relevant to those of us in this Zoom meeting, it means the collapse of ecosystems all over the world. I grew up in Kentucky, a place where there are license plates that say Friends of Coal, and coal keeps the lights on. And yeah, I never really thought too much about that until I learned about mountaintop removal, which if you don't know, it's basically what modern coal mining is, blowing up mountains and forests to get to coal seams beneath. I'm talking about using explosives. It's like a war, and it poisons the air and water for people in these communities. There are places where the streams are orange. I've seen it. So I've been against this for a while now. I remember as a middle schooler thinking, if we know that this coal stuff is a limited resource, we know that we will inevitably have to switch to renewable energy anyway. How can we allow this to continue? See, that's how I used to think about But the truth is, we still have over 5 times as much coal, oil, and gas as it is safe to burn if we want to avoid the worst of climate change. So waiting until after we burn it all to transition to renewable energy, it's not just bad for the Appalachian Mountains. It's a pretty lethal option for much of life on Earth. But maybe you don't care about the environment, in quotation marks, that thing that exists over there somewhere. Do you care about the senseless annihilation of millions of human beings? That's part of this too. Those little Boy Scouts who I saw play tag at Dachau, who seemed gleefully unaware of the horrors of the past. Someday they will be grown-ups in a climate-changed world. And I wonder what they'll say to those of us who already were grown-ups in the before times, just before their time, when it was still possible to save some of the world's great cities from being lost to the sea. When there was still enough chocolate and avocados and coffee to go around. In the old climate, in this one, living in this moment, what do you think they will say about us? Perhaps they'll say we were gleefully unaware of the horrors of the future. Not that it really matters how gleeful we are. We could try being gloomy, but I'm pretty sure the laws of physics will still work the same way. Okay. So, we're going to a little bit of a pause here, and we're actually going to jump all the way to the end of the piece. Now, there's a lot that happens in the interim there. I get pretty worked up at one point, but I do ultimately come around to a place of hope. And that's largely because of movements like Sunrise, who we'll be hearing from a little bit later on. But I do leave the audience on a little bit more of a cosmic note. And for that, I'm actually going to take you into another space here. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust, and dust to dust, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust. Once upon a time, on a planet called Earth, there were these creatures called dinosaurs. Big dragon things. And the only reason they're not still there is because of a giant asteroid that came from outer space. And somewhere in time on that same little planet, there were these creatures called humans. Funny monkey things who, as of now, are still there, but seem determined to change that. Que sera, sera, we'll see. the universe breathes on. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return, as mountains bulge in and out of Earth's crust like ocean waves, and the Milky Way hula hoops our solar system, giggling giddily on, as neo-dinosaurs soar through the wind once more, playing cat and mouse more brilliantly than ever before, conquering the Earth and then evaporating into the ether, leaving only their bones behind for future organisms to discover and ponder over in a renaissance of inquiry. It's and the universe breathes on. All right. So, okay. So, there we go, folks.
Wonderful. Blake, thank you for that performance. Beautiful. Um, I love the candle. The universe breathes on.
Yes, indeed.
Beautiful performance, and I've read your whole play. I look forward to seeing it all performed. There's quite a bit in it and to talk about. And I'd like to start by first asking you, I think, what might be an obvious question, but what inspired you to write Prelude to the Apocalypse?
Yeah. Well, I'd written several other shows, solo shows before this, actually, and I'd also been involved in climate activism. I was involved in a fossil fuel divestment campaign on my college campus at NYU, trying to get the school to divest its endowment from the fossil fuel industry. I'd been involved in fight against the Keystone XL pipeline, participated in a direct action, got arrested for that. And so I've been involved in this climate fight. And then I'd also done these solo shows, but it's funny because I found subtle ways to sneak in climate change to all of my previous pieces, but just usually like little bits and pieces. But actually, a director who I've worked with, Jacob Sexton, who may be watching right now, at a time when I was trying to figure out what to write about next, he said, you're so passionate about these climate issues. Why don't you do a whole show about it? And at first, frankly, I was a little bit hesitant because it is such a daunting subject, and it's something that is so all-encompassing. It affects all aspects of everything. And so, theater, most of the time you're trying to hone in on something very specific, a person or a moment in time. And so it's sort of like, how do you theatricalize this? And so it was a challenge, to think about how do I find my way in to make it personal and specific and interesting to me. But Prelude to the Apocalypse is what I came up with. And I guess, try not to shy away from the challenge, but as an artist, take on those things that are maybe a little bit scary. So that's sort of how I came about.
I'm glad you did. And tell us about the visual world of the piece on stage.
Right.
I think Brian has some photos also that to show us, so you might talk about these.
Sure. Yeah. So you got a little bit of a taste of some of it here, although very very much pared down. But it did. The set and the design definitely played a big role. I'm a sucker for design myself, and you did. What's kind of cool is you got to experience some of the sound design by Lauren Schober in this version of it. But obviously we didn't get the lighting. Which Megan Lang, I want to give a shout outs to all my collaborators here, did. But I actually did some of the set design, and I called it an installation because I'm very sort of inspired by installation art and that sort of thing, sort of heightened abstract world. Okay, and so here we can see a little bit of the set there. So you can see a desk, pretty similar to what we've got here, but one big difference is we actually had a live feed of this the hourglass. There was a little tiny camera on the desk, and so you had this massive looming hourglass in the background. A little bit of a heavy-handed symbol there, but it's a good one. And the show was almost exactly an hour, so you really could watch the sand drain throughout it, and they even did some video effects on that at times. But the other things you'll see in that photo, you'll see underneath the disc, there's this tangle of all these different extension cords and things like that, and that's sort of to show how we're all tangled up in this system in many ways. At least those of us, in the developed world, in this sort of consumptive lifestyle. Whether we know it or not, it's right beneath our feet, and so it's sort of feeling like almost entangled in that. Then you also had in the background, and this is a little bit less clear in some of the photos, but was clear in the space. There's a massive pile of trash, which this piece was produced in New York City. I can't speak to other cities, but certainly we'll have these huge piles of trash on the street corner on trash day. So that was kind of the inspiration. But this idea of sort of the effects of the consumption that are kind of just out of sight, kind of looming in the shadows, this place called away where we throw things, and just the impact that's kind of looming behind us, this sort of ominous trash pile. So that was kind of the set in which it occurred. There was also some growth on the wall, kind of representing a little bit of the natural world trying to persist amidst civilization crawling up this brick wall there. But yeah, we also had some. I don't know if you wanted to mention some of the other moments in the show. I know we talked about. There was also a dance sequence at one point. So there were a lot of different.
I know you do a lot of movement, including dance. Right. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So it wasn't all. The whole show didn't take place at a desk like this. There was a point where I got really, really sort of worked up, and in my sort of anger, I like threw the cupcake at the wall, and I knocked over the glass of water, and then I somehow begin to do this sort of singing in the rain routine. And I guess we've got a photo of that, with the umbrella there that came from the trash pile. But part of the idea with this whole singing in the rain thing is that I guess Gene Kelly's embracing getting wet, right? But it's sort of like going down swinging, trying to have some sense of joy as the world is falling apart around you amidst all the elements. So there was a dance routine that occurred midway through, lots of little moments, especially in the second half, that were a little bit more theatrical, but we got to see the more pared down beginning in this Zoom version.
That's terrific. I know you've written several other solo shows, and I do want to be able to bring in our guest because time just always seems to fly by so much. We are putting our producer Brian and Brianna are going to put different links, including your website, so that people can certainly look you up, as well as the Sunrise Movement, into the chat. And I'll ask you maybe a little bit more, but let's go ahead and get Muriel in on this. There's much to talk about here. And at first, I do want to remind the audience that posted in the chat is the tip jar. So the Marsh, again, receives just 70% of its funding through ticket sales, and there are no ticket sales. So please, any support you're able to give is greatly appreciated. And we encourage questions and comments from the audience. Please post them in the chat. We'll answer what we can, and our producers will help us keep an eye on that. But now I want to welcome to the conversation Muriel McDonald, one of the hub coordinators for Sunrise Bay Area, one of the largest hubs of the growing youth-led movement to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. Muriel's an environmental justice organizer and activist, organizing this movement that brought the Green New Deal into the public imagination and pushed climate to the top of the Democratic Party's agenda. She serves as a hub coordinator for the Sunrise Bay Area, which is one of the largest and most active hubs of the Sunrise Movement, which is really everywhere. It's all over the country. And I think maybe she can fill us in if it's all over the world. But I know I want to hear, Muriel, that you've conceived and led some of the movement's biggest direct actions, including with our now vice presidential nominee, Kamala Harris. So please welcome Muriel.
Thank you so much for having me, Gail and Blake. It's such an honor to be chatting with you both. And Blake, I really enjoyed those excerpts from your show. I hope I get to see the full thing someday. And it's just such a treat to be here. I'm a huge fan of the Marsh, and I actually live down the street from one of the Marsh's locations in San Francisco. So to get to be in conversation in the digital space that is the Marsh is a real treat.
Wonderful. We have a short, it's about a 3-minute video, and I thought we'd start with that to give everyone kind of an overview of what you're doing. Brian, if you want to play that.
Right now, we're in a crisis of historic proportions. We've never seen anything like this before. Not only a pandemic that's sweeping the country, but also a collapse of our economy. Nearly 1 in 5 workers in the U.S. are facing layoffs or loss of hours due to the COVID-19 crisis. This is a tragic and frightening moment for our country. It is also a wake-up call for how devastating the effects of the climate crisis might be. Imagine what dealing with climate disasters would look like during the fallout from COVID-19. Scarcity, broken infrastructure, social distancing. How are you supposed to help people? Take care of one another. This isn't a question of if, it's when. And if we don't act now to respond to both these monumental threats, climate change could make us even more vulnerable to the effects of COVID-19 or future pandemics. A warmer climate can dampen immune responses, and changing seasonal patterns make it harder to predict the impact of viruses. Weather patterns altered by climate change influence the spread of airborne diseases, allowing them to travel farther and faster. And there is very real potential for melting permafrost to unleash terrible pathogens into the world, some of which may be even more deadly than what we're facing now. This is why we need a Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is not just a response to climate change. It is a response to the systems of inequality and injustice that the COVID-19 crisis has made so clear. It is a way to provide the critical economic recovery that our country desperately needs. It puts people back to work and invests in industries needed to rebuild our economy. It is a crucial step to ensure that we build a future that works for everyone. And realizing this vision of the Green New Deal can start right here in California. Our health and our future is on the line. We need California's leaders to respond to this critical political moment. If Governor Gavin Newsom implemented a just and fair Green New Deal, he wouldn't just be implementing a set of policies and programs, but rather he'd be building a new California that leads the nation by building the framework for a just, equitable, and sustainable new way of life. If we push, if we organize, we can make sure these are more than just temporary measures. They become a part of how we take care of each other on a day-to-day basis. Now more than ever, we need California's elected leaders to protect our health, climate, and future, starting by standing up to big oil. California, one of the largest oil-producing states in the nation, can no longer allow fossil fuel companies to continue drilling in our communities and wrecking our future. California youth will not stop organizing until we end the state's production of fossil fuel and jumpstart a national 10-year mobilization towards 100% clean and renewable energy, guaranteed good jobs, and economic prosperity for all. Join the movement today. Join Sunrise.
That's terrific. Wonderful to have this movement now. California has long been a leader. I've worked here a long time. So 2006, the Global Warming Solutions Act under Governor Schwarzenegger, and now so much is happening, and things are happening across the whole country. Tell us more about specific things that you are working on.
Sure thing. So, I think when we talk about climate activism, when we talk about addressing climate, there's a lot of different levels to how we can talk about our work. But a big part of what we're doing is not dissimilar from what Blake is doing with his show, which is changing the narrative around climate and changing the conversation around climate, from one of, where we're talking about whether or not climate change is real, which is very harmful debate to be stuck on, to a conversation about what is the plan to address the climate crisis, and is it in line with what science and justice demands? And another part of that work is to seize the public imagination and seize the public narrative, the media narrative around climate, and kind of take control of it and make it that powerful narrative that we know needs to be told, so that we can effectively push our elected officials to support a Green New Deal at local, state, federal levels, and fight for the systemic change that we need. And I think that's a really important connection to make, right? Is that the fossil fuel industry has sold us many lies over the past 50, 100 years that they knew were lies. And one of those many lies has been that we need to take individualized actions to address the climate crisis. That if I recycle and you get a Prius and we replace our takeout with compostable takeout containers, that if we all just do our part, like, we don't need big systemic change to address the climate crisis. And in fact, if we aren't doing our little parts, we don't have any place asking for systemic change. But that's not true. And we know that, especially now where we're at, we need dramatic and visionary systemic change to address the climate crisis. Everybody in the world could start recycling and it would not matter. It would not make a difference, not at the scale that we need. So helping everybody we know, everyone in our circles, in the everyone who hears our message, to understand that what we're calling for and what we need is systemic change, not individual change. And it's okay if you don't have a Prius. You can still demand that the fossil fuel industry stop fracking next to schools.
Yeah, someone said putting recycling is like putting a Band-Aid on gangrene, but we do have to continue to do that, but we do need systemic change. Tell us about the Green New Deal. Now, that's a 10-year plan to mobilize our society to 100% clean and renewable energy. Yes, by what year?
Yeah, the Green New Deal is more of a policy framework than a specific bill, just like the New Deal. Which, as we know, was, rolled out to address the Great Depression in the 30s. The Green New Deal will be a series of policies that address the many sectors of the climate, the many sectors that need to transition away from fossil fuels and that we need to change in order to address the climate crisis, from how we build our houses and get our energy, to how we move across the country, how we ship things, how we build things, how we're creating our energy. And all of those industries need to transform, and that those transformations can look like, instead of an economic loss, an economic opportunity, where we're putting people to work, giving them good union jobs, and not only putting new people to work with new jobs, but helping fossil fuel workers and people who work in industries that are killing us to transition from those jobs into these good green jobs, pay for the transitional training, make sure that they're getting paid the same amount that they were getting paid to work on the oil rig, kind of take away this incentive to stick with fossil fuels, this perverse incentive that we've created. I haven't created, but the fossil fuel industry has created with how our systems have been designed. So the policy framework exists, but it's something that will hopefully be rolled out over several years and developed at all levels, local, state, and national, and seeing the early attempts at that, even though we don't necessarily have the political power yet to make it happen. For example, there was a bill at the federal level around housing and making sure that we start with public housing, which the US government already owns.
Yes.
So there's no question of overreach, right? It's just like, we own this public housing, people are living in it. Let's make sure that it's green. Let's make sure that it's not a food desert. Let's make sure that it's electric. Let's make sure that it's healthy to live in and there's not asbestos in the walls. And so we start to see how the solution to the climate crisis is all tied up with human health and all tied up with, a livable future and all of the meanings of that word.
There's so much hope because of the youth movement involved. We really need the youth, and it is very, it makes me feel so hopeful. I've been working in the arena for many, many years, and I just feel so hopeful with all the good work that's being done. And Blake, your show hits that we didn't get to see tonight on a number of aspects, including talking about, how climate change threatens our global food system, and people on Wall Street buying land that is now frozen because eventually it'll be, wanted agriculture.
Right. Right. Anticipating the climate change buying up farmland with fertile soil that's not a good climate now, but will be in the future.
Some people say that border wall is about climate change, so people are going to be moving north, and as the climate warms. So there's an awful lot on our plate. I want to first ask, because the time does go so fast, but Muriel, do you have any final thoughts and ideas you'd like to share with us?
Sure. Well, I was chatting with Blake earlier today as we kind of were preparing for this evening, and we were talking a little bit about the relationship between theater and climate activism, and how, for me at least, as someone who loves the theater and also loves doing direct action, and I can see that Blake also does both of those things, that they're not that dissimilar, right? They're both about storytelling. They're both about holding the attention. And I think, one of the things that I've really come to love about working on climate is that if you can tell a good story in a compelling way, that you are really doing some of the most effective work you can be doing to address the climate crisis. And so, if you want to align your actions with your values and buy a Prius, go right ahead. But if you really want to have an impact on the climate crisis, then, I would strongly consider everyone to find an organization that is engaging with policy or politics and fighting for systemic change. And that doesn't have to be Sunrise. It can be. People of all ages are welcome. But
can they find those on your websites? Can they find other links to other organizations, or do you have a lot of information right there that people could tap into?
Yeah, you're welcome to reach out to us. I don't think we have links to other organizations on our homepage, but I haven't looked at it in a while, so it's possible we do.
Well, you have a lot of great information up there, and I'm so grateful that you do. The information should be posted. I put several links to both the national movement and the Sunrise Bay Area movement, again, who is a very one of the biggest in the country. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. And Blake, I know what else, what more is coming up for you? I know you have quite a few things on your own plate, and I'd like to know, because I know you have another project in development. So what should we be looking for next from you?
What I'm working on now is a little bit different in that I'm calling it a musical memoir. It's going to be released over podcast platforms. It's called Defiant Ponds. That's the name of the piece. And it's a collaboration with a friend of mine who's a guitarist, a really talented singer-songwriter named Tyler Stahl. We've been in some bands together over the years and written some music. And so this is a piece that's kind of similar to some of my past work, and even this show that we did now, where it's storytelling, there's a poetry element. But in this case, there's songs that bubble up, and I sing and play harmonica, so that's a lot of fun. And it's going to be released in 8 chapters, like I said, over podcast platforms. this fall. So you can learn more about that on my website, which is blakesugarman.com. I've also got a mailing list there. But really, it's one of these things where we started working on it before COVID, but some of the themes that we explore in the piece have really come into focus since then. It's a lot about the role that work plays in our lives, which is certainly something that I think is on a lot of people's minds right now. And also the ways in which, frankly, the market fails to support things that we think are really important. And so part of the piece is engaging with small business owners in New York. The part of the name comes from this, is one of the starting points is engaging with this guy who owns a little chess shop in Greenwich Village. And a conversation I had with him in which he says, how long until this whole city becomes a Starbucks? And with COVID, some of those trends may be accelerating. And so part of the piece is connecting the dots between these experiences of these small businesses that we all love in New York City, and then connecting that to the experience of being an artist, doing something, especially like what I'm doing, it's a little bit unusual, and is not, the most lucrative, you might say. And so thinking about how do you, thinking about the future of this, and then where the show really sort of starts to take a turn is where we bring technology into the equation, thinking about the exponential growth of computing, artificial intelligence, and thinking about, okay, well, people have all these dystopian visions of a world, the robots are going to take all of our jobs. And then we're saying, well, wait a minute, maybe this is an opportunity to actually completely reevaluate how we structure our society,
Right,
how we relate to work. And so that's part of where the piece ends up going towards the end, is this more kind of utopian, futurist kind of thing, but touches on a lot of different things.
That's great. I really look forward to it. And we're coming to our end here. And I just want to note that Muriel said something about climate deniers, and we had Timothy Mooney on last month, who performed Man Cave, and taught us something I think might be helpful for any of us who may have to convince our right-wing friends or those who are doubters and climate change deniers, because, first of all, they really already know, at least the leadership that's wreaking havoc to our air, water, and food supply knows, although I'm afraid there are people that trust and believe them, but believe me, the leaders know. So I find Tim's retort helpful to simply say to deniers, I think you're kidding yourself. I think you're kidding yourself. And it's not, sending blame, but because we're in this age of the Anthropocene, some geologists argue that this age began with the Industrial Revolution. It's the current geological age, viewed as the period which human activity has been dominant influence on climate and the environment. And it's the age of man and woman. We humans have impacted the earth. And some say it's in God's hands, but it's we to whom she gave it. We are the stewards of this planet. So check out our links to the chat room. See Blake Sugarman's show full of Prelude to the Apocalypse for what it's worth when you can. Look to our youth and the great work of the Sunrise Movement, and look to yourselves. We're living in a critical time, and in many ways, take action each day for a better world. And vote. So I have a special thank you to Blake Sugarman and the Sunrise Movement, and look for upcoming Solo Art Seal shows on the Marsh stream at themarsh.org. Next week, Wednesday, August 19th, don't miss Bob Brader and Spitting in the Face of the Devil. Can you imagine discovering that your father is a predator? Hailed by critics as brilliant, masterful, and unforgettable, Spitting in the Face of the Devil is New York monologist Bob Brader's gripping true story of discovering that his abusive and charismatic ex-Marine father is a pedophile. Brader's daring, uplifting, and often comedic play has toured the U.S. and Canada to tremendous critical acclaim. It's a powerful tale of personal survival and triumph, and pertains to today's focus on sexual predators. A great show. We hope to see you next week. So thanks to our Zoom and YouTube audience, our producers, Brian and Brianna, and always to the lovely Stephanie Wiseman. Stay healthy and safe. Practice physical distancing and social respect to all fellow humans. We're all in this together.
Thank you, Gail. This was wonderful. Thank you, Blake. Thank you, Muriel. Nice to know you're a Marsh fan. How wonderful is that? Thank you for joining us on Marsh Stream, your public broadcast platform. Thank you so much. Bye.